South Australia's daily COVID update. First of all, some extremely good news today. I'm joined at the press conference by the Honourable Rob Lucas, now I think in his 40th year in the South Australian Parliament, but he's never been as excited as he is today because we're announcing a massive support and stimulus package for businesses that have been affected by COVID, but also to try and create some more demand, get people out spending money in our economy in South Australia. We do have the fastest growing economy in the country. We do have the lowest unemployment in the history of our state, but there is no doubt since the 26th of December, many businesses have been affected. We've already announced round 7 of our support. That was done some weeks ago, and the Treasurer has shovelled out tens of millions of dollars. That package was worth around $40 million. Today we announce round 8, which has got a value of around $50 million worth of support, but also stimulus for our economy. So when we've had cash grants to businesses that are affected, whether they be in the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, the fitness sector, which has still got restrictions in place, that will continue with exactly the same arrangements. So up to $22,000 cash grant to those businesses who remain affected. In addition to that, to businesses outside of that, there is a further application which they can make if they are suffering significant losses as well. That will kick into place as of this coming week, and we hope to have had a lot of that money flowing out to businesses who are affected by these restrictions by the end of the coming week. But in addition to that, we need to now start to stimulate economic activity in South Australia again. And so we are now announcing 2 new rounds of the Great State Vouchers. These have been hugely popular here in South Australia. They've been copied right around the country. So we will have a new Great State Voucher focused on accommodation. So the Great State Accommodation Voucher will be $100 for the CBD, $50 outside of the CBD, and we also have a new voucher for experiences. So that is going to be hugely beneficial, and I think it will give us this bounce out of the situation that we've had where many businesses have suffered from a lack of demand over the last 4 or 6 weeks. In fact, many businesses have struggled for an extended period of time, especially in our CBD, and that's why we want to focus on those. But in addition to the cash grants and the Great State Vouchers, what we will also be doing is further focus on our CBD. Now, we know that CBDs right around the country, in fact probably right across the world, have been disproportionately hit by the coronavirus. Fewer people going into the CBD. You would have noticed that as of Thursday last week, we started to get people back into the offices gradually, with 25% now heading back in, and we hope to be able to increase that in the coming weeks. But in addition to that, we want to support the Adelaide City Council. I've just been on the phone this morning to the Mayor, Sandy Verschoor. She is absolutely delighted with what we've been able to negotiate over the last couple of weeks. First of all, $1 million going to the Adelaide City Council for Unleashing Adelaide, which will be a series of programs which will be focused on over the coming months to really get people back into the CBD in a safe way, but certainly in a way to support those businesses that have been adversely affected. We're going to provide free public transport from midday on Friday right through to midnight on Sunday night, right throughout the festival and fringe period. We know this is an important period for our state, so free public transport. We'll be putting $250,000 into the Adelaide City Council's Welcome Back Food Voucher program for people to spend in the CBD. This will more than double the program that has already been announced by the Adelaide City Council. We'll be putting another $250,000 into their program to activate outdoor spaces for many of our licensed premises in South Australia, so they can extend those numbers. This has been hugely successful in the first couple of rounds, and I'm sure it will be very successful, especially now with the state government partnering with the Adelaide City Council to really turbocharge this successful program. We'll also be providing $150,000 to the Adelaide City Council They are partnering with Business SA to provide business advice to businesses who are affected by these restrictions. We're very, very pleased to be supporting that. We'll continue to extend our payroll tax deferral for the remainder of the 21-22 financial year for tourism and hospitality businesses and gyms and other businesses impacted by the 1 per 7 square metre density restrictions upon application to Revenue SA. And we'll also be extending our major events grants program through to the end of March. So this was going to go through to the end of this month. Clearly the restrictions are still having an adverse effect on the major event sector, so we'll extend that through to the end of March. But this is another practical example. I think we're still the first state in the country who has put out a support and stimulus package. We've done two. Today is our second since the Omicron wave. So I'm very proud that the government has been able to step in, support these businesses. But the number one thing that we can all be doing as South Australians at the moment is getting out and safely supporting our hospitality sector. They've been doing it tough, but they're very professional, they're very capable. It is safe to go out. There are COVID marshals on all of those sites. You still need to QR code check in when you're going to those sites. We know that it is safe to go out. We have reduced that density restriction from 25% now to 50%. And so we are hoping that people will book into their favourite cafe, restaurant, bar, pub or club in the coming weeks and provide that support to a sector which has been doing it extremely tough. Now, I've also got the numbers for you today. There's continuing good news in our state. 1,740 positive cases reported to us in the 24 hours to midnight last night. That's the lowest we've had for the entire year. It takes our 7-day average now down below 2,000 per day. We are definitely now in a very good position compared to where we were 4 or 5 weeks ago. Of those 1,740 new cases, 1,329 came from PCR tests, 411 came from positive rapid antigen tests reported to SA Health. We're now down to just under 23,000 active cases in South Australia. So 22,985 active cases. Every day we see that number falling, which is absolutely fantastic. The sad news today, of course, unfortunately, we still have some deaths to report. We have 5 deaths to report. 1 person in their 50s, 1 in their 60s, 2 in their 70s, and 1 in their 80s. So whilst things are going very well, we cannot be complacent in South Australia. We are asking anybody in this state who has got any symptoms whatsoever to go and have that PCR test. You would note that the numbers in terms of the positive rapid antigen tests are now diminishing. That's because we've been messaging now for the better part of a week that if you've got any symptoms or if you're a close contact, by far and away the best test to have is the PCR. It's got a very rapid turnaround time in South Australia at the moment. And so you're not going to be waiting in line, and you're not going to be waiting days for your results. You'll get your results pretty much the same day, which is absolutely fantastic. And then you'll know for sure whether or not you do have the Omicron infection or not. That means that you can start your 10 days a lot earlier. I will also just put in a plug again, as per usual, for vaccination. Whether it be your first dose, your second dose, a booster, or the 5 to 11-year-old first vaccination, please get along. There is massive excess supply in South Australia at the moment. We've got the vaccines in place. We've got the clinics in place. Now what we're needing is people to turn up to have that vaccination. As we increase that vaccination rate, it gives us even more confidence to reduce those restrictions down. We're very hopeful that we get a result from ATAGI, the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, in the coming days to allow 16 and 17-year-olds in South Australia to have their boosters. This would be great because we have plenty of 16 and 17-year-olds who will be going back to school by the 14th of February. It would be great for them to have that booster shot. So I'm constantly refreshing my email, waiting for that advice from ATAGI. As soon as that comes through, we'll be able to get straight on with that booster shot, because don't forget, that is using the adult booster, which is already in place. So I'm going to open up for any questions, and then myself and the Treasurer will continue to answer any questions that you might have on this package so far.
Maybe just to clarify the COVID numbers, I think you just stopped short of telling us how many people are in hospital and how many people are in ICU as well. Can you just clarify?
Yes, 283 in hospital, so a slight reduction on yesterday. 29 in ICU, but only 3 of those are on a ventilator.
And just so we're really clear with this next round of $22,000 grants, this is only going to be applicable for businesses affected by the 1 to 7 metre rule.
No. So what we did in round 7 is exactly what we're going to be doing in round 8. So if businesses have suffered a significant reduction and they're outside of those areas of tourism, hospitality and fitness, they can make that application. We certainly have plenty coming in round 7. So there's a sort of a catch-all for those businesses who are adversely affected. Many of them are in the CBD.
How do you answer any claims by businesses who are very publicly saying they don't want you to enter their cafes or bars or restaurants?
Well, I looked at that list, and quite frankly, I think my daughter would be absolutely humiliated if I did turn up there. She might be at one of those, who knows. But look, the reality is we need to sometimes make tough decisions. Some of them are very unpopular, but ultimately we make all of our decisions in the best interest of the state overall. We've still had the fewest days in lockdown of any state in the country. We've got the fastest growing economy. We've got the lowest unemployment in the history of South Australia, and I'll continue to make the decisions that I need to make. Now, yesterday provided some relief to hospitality businesses in South Australia, and I'm hopeful that in the coming weeks we'll be able to reduce those restrictions down even further. No, look, as I said, look, I take their repudiation. It is what it is, but I've got to make decisions in the best interest of the state. But I'm pretty sure if I turned up at the Woolshed, my daughter would be, shaking her head. The reality is, hospitality has done it tough. My thoughts are with this sector, not just for the employers, but also the employees, many of who have lost shifts, some people who have lost their jobs. But what we're doing now, by getting through it safely over the last 6 or 8 weeks, is that now we're hoping to stand up those jobs as quickly as we possibly can.
Did you look at any other mechanism outside of just cash grants? I mean, speaking to hospitality businesses repeatedly through this pandemic, they've looked for things like a JobKeeper. Going forward, obviously the federal government had that sort of payment. Was any consideration to a local JobKeeper style payment considered while restrictions remain in place? No,
not really, because you're quite right. The separation between federal and state was that we would provide the business continuity support, and that the feds would provide that employment or employee benefit. And so they do still have their packages which are offered through Services Australia.
But was there any consideration for something mirrored at a local
level?
No. That's what
Look, Rory, I just make the point. We're the only state in Australia which has offered any stimulus and support, and this is our second round in 6 weeks.
Has this package come with any consultation from the hospitality industry to say this is what they're after?
Yes, so if you remember when we had up to packages 4, 5 and 6, they were quite different from what we've offered here, and so 7 had a lot of consultation which was involved. 8 mirrors 7.
And have you spoken to any hospitality people since announcing, or since making this decision?
Yeah, so in the last couple of weeks we've had depth discussions with a range of stakeholder groups and individual businesses. Many in the CBD wanted to see the food vouchers brought in to try and stimulate activity, but they also wanted infrastructure grants to improve the amenity and get more people outdoor, but in a comfortable way. So we were able to do that. We've also been able to offer support to the Adelaide City Council to work with Business SA to provide some services and support to businesses that are doing it tough at the moment.
And is there any scope to increase that 25% back to the office that's in the CBD? A lot of businesses are saying you know, restrictions don't really count for much if there's still only 25% of the workforce back in the CBD.
Yeah, look, I think we're still the first state in the country to remove the work from home announcement. So, look, we're not in a position to say, let it rip. We'll leave that to other governments around the world. In South Australia, I think our prudent approach has actually delivered us the fastest growing economy and the lowest unemployment in the history of South Australia. We are, though, wanting to lift those restrictions, but to do it in a safe way that is going to be sustainable. There's no point in South Australia moving too quickly, then having a massive second wave, and then having to put restrictions back in place. What we want to do now is to ease those restrictions, grow the economy, grow those jobs, but do it in a way that's not going to end up with a second wave and further hospitalisation that would, if you like, compromise our ability to respond.
So is there any time frame on that? Are you looking at sort of in a couple of weeks' time?
Yeah, I announced it all yesterday at the press conference. I encourage you to have a look at those press conferences. Announced it yesterday that we're doing in 2-week increments, and so there'll be a further tranche in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and thereafter.
Are you hoping that'll include, particularly live music? We know that's been a bugbear for many in the hospitality industry, and that obviously performers themselves just want to get out there and play more gigs. So where does that fit into the timing? Hoping in the
well, I'm not going to go through every restriction today, because there's a lot.
Some hope, though,
yes.
They've been, as you rightly point out, they've been doing it tough. So
yeah. Well, look, I just note that New South Wales have put their bans in place to the end of February. I think what we're providing in South Australia is a pathway with 2 weekly increments in terms of reducing the restrictions. We're the first to actually remove the work from home guidance that has been in place. We're the first to give stimulus and support to the sector. We do think it is now time to go back and support the hospitality sector, your favourite cafes and restaurants and bars that maybe you've been staying away from. We are seeing reduced numbers in South Australia, and that gives us real confidence to provide this messaging to the sector that it is now time to carefully go back, but to go back nevertheless. COVID marshals are in place, the QR code check-in is still in place, and I know that many people are going to be wanting to go back and to support those sectors which have been hard hit.
Is there any scope to reduce that 10 days of isolation for positive cases? I know WA has now gone down to 7 days. Are we looking to do that here?
Yeah, look, I've addressed this a couple of times that we probably will, but we won't now. When we get a daily survey done by everybody that's in isolation, we ask them whether they have symptoms. At the moment, we know that at day 7, you still have between 30 and 40% of people who are still having symptoms. So if they go back into the workforce, you'll actually end up with them reinfecting and having even greater problems. Now, I know that 10 days is a differential time, but we are actually seeing our numbers in South Australia coming down dramatically, and particularly in our health sector, where we were having some real problems associated with workforce back 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're now really at less than half the number of people furloughed and COVID positive that we had back then. So there's a real science by the reason why we are 10. Don't forget, only 2 months ago we were at 14 days. So we brought it down from 14 days to 10. I note that there was a consideration at National Cabinet recently to go down to 5. That was rejected completely. We still know that there are 30 to 40% of those people at day 7 who are still infectious. If they go out, we're just perpetuating wave after wave in South Australia.
Jeremy, can I ask, when are you hoping to open for the general public access to the next 2 rounds of the Great State vouchers? Is that, I don't think that's been detailed and released. Is that going to be this week, next week?
So in the first instance, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with people that want to make their properties available. So there's always that first interim step. But if you just wait for 1 second, I can tell you that the voucher will start on the 18th of February. So it'll be able to be used from the 18th of February.
So is applications open today?
No, because we've got to get... I haven't got that detail. We'll do another press conference down the track. We're announcing this today. But usually what happens is, first of all, we go out to all the properties and say who wants to participate. We always get a pretty good uptake with regards to that. We'll then publish that. We'll open it for the ballot system. Then we'll be advising people. So there's a huge number, in fact 160,000 vouchers which will be available in rounds 7 and 8.
Can I also ask you, about, have you seen an update this morning about the major emergency declaration in the states north regarding the weather event that's gone through? What's the Commissioner's told you?
We provided a full detailed briefing yesterday. In fact, yesterday we had SES Chief Officer Chris Beattie standing up with quite a comprehensive briefing for the media, and I can get that through to you. Look, the reality is we had to take the decision to put a second major emergency declaration in place to give the state coordinator the powers to deal with some of the heavy vehicle access, food security issues, and also to better support some of those remote communities who have been cut off. Now, look, the thing about this massive weather event that we've had in South Australia is a bit of a double-edged sword. We've got some pastoralists who have never been happier. They've got rain, incredible rainfall, which is going to sustain their business for a very long time into the future. But of course, from an infrastructure perspective, it is going to be very costly. So all of that rapid assessment is being done at the moment. There is widespread damage across our state, especially in the north and also over in the west. And we're working through to try and provide alternative routes and to try and secure safely that corridor infrastructure, whether it be road or rail.
Has there been issues in those remote parts of the state getting food in at the moment?
More, it's mainly an issue, to be quite honest with you, in the Northern Territory. So we get very little coming from the Northern Territory down, but there's a lot from South Australia going up, and we've had to, I think, look at a number of reasonably circuitous routes to get food into the Northern Territory. They are becoming increasingly isolated there.
With many students coming back to the classroom
Yes.
this week, are you confident with the rates of vaccination with that 5 to 11 age group?
Yeah, I think South Australia is in the top couple in the entire country in terms of 5 to 11-year-old vaccinations. There was a situation 3 or 4 weeks ago when parents were saying, I don't want to send my children back to school unless they can be vaccinated. Well, there are appointments today. People should have no excuse whatsoever. We've had, I think, more than 1,000 available appointments down at Wavell now for 2 or 3 weeks, every single day. If people are concerned about it, they can go online, they can book in, they can have that paediatric jab. It is a different dose than the adult jab, and there is a different time delay. There's an 8-week delay between those two doses, but there are plenty of paediatric doses in South Australia, and there are plenty of appointments. So if anybody hasn't had that dose yet, please get along and have it. Last time I looked, which was earlier last week, South Australia was second only to Tasmania. We just got in front of Victoria. Don't want to be competitive, but we just got in front of Victoria, which was good. And again, I just want to thank the parents for turning up. I particularly want to thank all those brave young ones, 5 to 11-year-olds, who I don't think they like having injections, but they know that it's the best for them, especially before they head back to school.
Premier, while we're back on COVID, reflecting on the change in restrictions last year announced yesterday and then today's
Yes.
package, what do you say to criticism that this has come potentially too late to save some businesses?
Well, look, business has really been put under pressure over the last 2 years. What we've tried to do is to optimise the position. You can't save every single business, but when you look at it from a macro perspective, South Australia does have the fastest growing economy in the country for the first time ever, Rory, for the first time ever. And so from a holistic perspective, South Australia has weathered the COVID storm better than anybody else, but we do accept that within that, there are some businesses who have been very adversely affected, and that's why our support packages and our stimulus packages have been very much targeted at those businesses. So we've only finished round 7 of support and stimulus recently, and we've already announced 8 because we know that these continuing restrictions that are in place do have an adverse effect. But what we're very hopeful of is with the reducing numbers, the increasing vaccination, that we can further reduce those restrictions and get back to a sense of normality as quickly as possible. So we're now talking 2-week increments to lift those restrictions. I know our major focus was trying to get that density around hospitality up to 50% as quickly as possible, because we were repeatedly told by the sector that this is where they get to viability, but still we've got to go further. There were a couple of other announcements yesterday. Number one, You no longer need to QR code check-in when you go to retail or service stations. It's really now into those areas which have been transmission sites or have a vulnerable cohort there. So they still remain for aged care, for hospitals, also for fitness facilities and hospitality. But for the vast majority now, they have been removed. We still want people to wear their masks. And of course, the other big announcement yesterday was that the ban on paediatric elective surgery has now been lifted. There'll be further meetings at the beginning of the coming week on the remainder of elective surgery, and I'm hopeful that we can start to remove those restrictions as quickly as possible.
Harry, just before we get a couple of questions to the Treasurer, the opposition leader has been out this morning talking about the decision to privatise the state train network.
Yes.
This came into effect a year ago, essentially today, if my memory serves. He's arguing that the number of complaints has gone up over that 12-month period.
It's just not true. Peter Malinowskis must wake up every morning trying to find something negative to say. The reality is the outsourcing of the contract has produced fewer complaints than what we had when it was in state hands, and better on-time delivery. He was saying this was going to be an absolute disaster for our state. He said nobody would be getting on this. It was going to be running. All sorts of claims were made by the Labor Party with regards to the lead-up to the privatisation. None of it has come true. In fact, on-time performance has improved.
Is there enough train time for state train?
Well, this is an old story because there was always a transition period where the state government would be providing people to Keolis Downer, and that transition is occurring. Treasurer.
Feel like the steak knife salesman, but there's more. I just wanted to indicate the government has been doing a range of things in relation to trying to promote economic activity and stimulus, and just a couple of those are the government has negotiated special funding arrangements with the Fringe. So to respond to Rory's question earlier in relation to live performances, we're providing some support to the Fringe to ensure that live performers are going to be able to participate in a COVID-safe way during the Fringe. So that's one particular initiative the government's already taken. We're not announcing that today. We've already taken it. But the other, another example, and as I said, there are a number of others. The government has funded for the opening of the festival centre, which will occur in a couple of weeks' time. An activation period there for the festival centre in terms of activating programs and performances down in and around that festival centre precinct. And then in the, I think it's the first or second week of March, when the festival plaza will be opened, there's an activation period there in terms of, again, encouraging people to come to the festival plaza, come to the festival centre for live performances, food trucks, activities, all through that period from February through to March. And that's something that the government has already made decisions on, provided funding to Renewal SA and to the Festival Centre. So they are just a couple of other examples of not things we're announcing today, but the government has been for a number of weeks now looking at what it is that we need to do to promote activity for people to come back to the CBD. The only other point I would make, and the Premier made this point briefly, is that all of these packages, these two packages, are being completely funded by the state government. There was a brief period last year where the federal government did, in addition to providing the employee support, which is their responsibility, ongoing responsibility, join in 50-50 funding with business support packages. But from late last year they indicated they no longer provide business support, funding for business support packages 50-50, and from the Mount Gambier support package, which some of you would have covered late last year, and together with these packages, they're completely funded by the state government.
Just how much is today's package, or are today's packages going to cost taxpayers?
Well, the estimated cost is 50 million. In addition, as the Premier said, to the first package, the estimated cost is 40 million. It is hard to estimate. From the first round, or the round that we've just processing at the moment, we've had significantly more of the hardship grant applicants than were originally estimated. That was almost impossible to estimate. That is businesses outside tourism, hospitality and the 1 per 7 square metre density restrictions. If they can demonstrate that they've had significant reduction in their turnover, they've been able to apply for grants, and that was almost impossible for Treasury to estimate because we had no experience in relation to how many were being impacted there. So there's been a significant increase in the number of those particular groups. But in total, we're looking at around about 6,000 to 7,000 businesses that so far have applied for the current round of assistance. They of course have until the 31st of March to apply for the current round of assistance, and similarly with this particular round that we're announcing today, they'll have through to the 31st of March to make application for assistance there as well. And again, just to repeat, as the Premier said, because Treasury's getting very good at shoveling money out the door as quickly as possible, which is perhaps a worrying sign, the first grants up to $22,000 will be processed, I'm told, by Thursday or Friday of this week. Those who've demonstrated eligibility for the current round of grants, that is, they've had a significant reduction in turnover, then they'll start receiving cash grants of up to the $22,000 from the end of this week. Not all of them will receive it from the end of the week, but they'll start processing them from the end of the week.
So where does the money come from?
The money comes from the wonderful taxpayers of South Australia, Rory. I mean, the government has to, the only way the government provides this sort of funding is through the taxpayers of South Australia, and we made some provision. There was a $300 million provision for contingencies in this particular budget, but with the significant increase in costs that we've had with health, for example, with the cost for rats, for example, vaccination costs and the like, together with these significant business support packages, we've well and truly spent more than that $300 million contingency. So for this year, as we indicated in the mid-year budget review, and I again indicate today, we're likely to see an increased deficit for this particular year, but this funding is all being processed during this particular financial year. Nothing's changing our estimate of modest surpluses from next financial year onwards.
Do you have any numbers on how many grants were applied for? You said the number was unexpected, but are you able to share in detail?
Yeah, so the current estimated aggregate is somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 have applied for both series of grants. It's broadly around about 3,000, 3,500 for the density restriction grants, the tourism, hospitality and the 1 per 7 square metres. And I remind you, it's not just gyms and fitness. There are dance studios, I'm told, Pilates classes and a range of other activities like that which are impacted by the 1 per 7 square metre density restriction. So there's about 3,500. At the current estimate, I think we've got somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 in other industry sectors that are being able to apply under the business hardship. But they have through till the 31st of March to apply for that, and so that number may well increase. Generally, most of them come in relatively early because they're struggling and they want to see the money as soon as possible, but we're going to have to wait till the end of March before we know what the final numbers are.
Can I ask you about the second major emergency declaration event which is taking place at the moment?
Well, you can. If you want anything detail other than money, then I'll have no knowledge at all. But go on.
Okay. Obviously, there's going to be an ask on taxpayers to help with the infrastructure rebuild. I understand the assessment teams are still out there.
Yeah. No, we have. At this stage, we have no idea. But look, whatever has to be done, you have to do. If you're in a disaster situation or a major emergency, again, we're going to have to find the funding for a major emergency or disaster. We're no different to previous governments, Labor and Liberal, and interstate governments, the same thing. If you've got a major emergency or a disaster, and if there are roads that have to be repaired, those sorts of things, we're going to have to find the funding for them. It's an inevitable consequence of that. But in terms of do we have an estimate, the answer at this stage is no.
Have there been any high-level conversations with the federal treasurer and the federal government about providing some funding? Because obviously we're talking about major national routes here that could be or have been affected when it comes to supply chain.
Certainly at officer level there have been discussions, but look, at this stage I don't have enough detail to engage the Federal Treasurer in those sorts of discussions. Not unreasonably he'd say to me, well, what is it that you're actually asking? So if there are opportunities there for federal state, there are a range of arrangements that the federal and state governments have anyway for disasters. We'll look at what we have to do, and the federal government have always been pretty generous in terms of trying to respond to national or state-based disasters and emergencies.
One more very quick comment.
I can just report, which I didn't have before, that there were 3,661 rat kit collections yesterday. So we are seeing that number fall, but we have been messaging for people to go and have the PCR test as the most accurate of all of those tests. So 3,661 rat kit collections yesterday, 9,917 PCR tests which were administered yesterday. Keep in mind that our full capacity in PCR is up over 20,000. So there's plenty of capacity in testing and also, of course, in terms of vaccination in South Australia this weekend.
Well, I've got you back mentioning rats there, Premier. What's your latest update with regards to the distribution of rats through the Education Department to school sites? Has that process started yet ahead of school returning next week?
Look, I don't have details, but I think we are all very excited about school going back next week. So from Monday, teachers will be there. So will children of essential workers from the 31st. Face-to-face learning begins on the 2nd for the receptions, 1s, 7s, 8s and Year 12s, as well as preschool, and then the remainder return on the 14th. So all lessons will begin on the 2nd. We've got about 40% of them which will be face-to-face. The other 60% will be learning online for the first sort of 10 days, and then we'll switch over on the 14th for everybody to be face-to-face.
Great, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
I can find that out for you, but I just don't know it. What are you doing in trouble? No, I don't know.